Welcome to the program. Once again, the Kremlin says a Western price cap on Russian oil would destabilize global energy markets, but would have no effect on Moscow's ability to sustain its military operations in Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Russia was preparing how it would respond to the move by the G7 and allies to ban countries and companies from dealing with Russian seaborne exports of oil. Several Russian officials have previously said Moscow will not sell oil to countries that abide by the cap. We'll come back to the story a bit later. In the meantime, India has given a list of products to Moscow for access to Russian markets. According to the foreign minister, during a briefing with his German counterpart, Annalena Baerbock, who is on a visit to India, Mr. Jaishankar Subramaniam believes India is very competitive and should be getting access to the Russian markets. It comes at a time that his country seeks to narrow a growing trade deficit with Russia at a time when Moscow faces acute shortage of some crucial materials following Western sanctions. And much earlier, Moscow had sent India a list of more than 500 products for potential delivery, including parts for cars, aircrafts and trains, as sanctions following Russia's invasion of Ukraine squeeze its ability to keep vital industries running. Russia has been India's largest supplier of military equipment for decades and is the fourth biggest market for Indian pharmaceuticals. But with India's biggest market purchases of Russian oil soaring and coal and fertilizer shipments also strong, the South Asian nation is looking for ways to balance trade.
We have also given the Russians a set of I would say, products which we believe we are very competitive in and which we feel should be getting access to the Russian market. We will see where there is a demand and supply and where there is a fit. I think largely a large part of it would be determined by market because in our country business is mostly in private sector hands. But I don't think people should read anything more into it other than the legitimate expectations of any trading country to increase its trade.
And as the fighting continues, several buildings have been heavily damaged in the center of Donetsk following this after the city was hit by shelling earlier today. However, there are no reports of casualties in the city after the shelling. Since 2014, Donetsk has been under the control of Russian-backed separatists who have accused Ukraine of shelling and targeting civilian infrastructure. In September this year, Moscow proclaimed the area part of Russia after holding a referendum in Donetsk and three other regions. Votes denounced by Kyiv and Western governments as illegal and coercive. Well, several people have been killed in explosions at two Russian military airfields. According to state media, a fuel tank exploded, killing 3 and injuring 6 in an airfield near the city Ryazan, southeast of Moscow. Another 2 people are reported to have been hurt in an explosion at an airfield in the Saratov region. Although it's not known what caused the blasts, both areas are hundreds of kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Long-range Russian strategic bombers are believed to be based in the Engels airbase in the Saratov region, with the regional governor saying security forces are checking what he calls reports of an incident at military installations. And while we move on to other stories, we have to bring back our lead story on the bulletin today, and that's the Kremlin saying Western price caps on Russian oil will destabilize global energy markets, but will have no effect on Moscow's ability to sustain its military operation in Ukraine. And that was heard from the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov in a phone conversation with journalists earlier today. He said Russia is preparing how it would respond to the move by the G7 and allies to ban countries and companies from dealing with Russian seaborne exports of oil. Several Russian officials have previously said that Russia will not sell oil to countries that abide by the cap. Let's begin our energy correspondent, Olu Phillips, to explain, Russia's position and what this means, the price cap on countries and the repercussions of this. Olu, explain to us what the G7 countries have done that's different from other sanctions imposed against Russia.
I don't think there's anything significant in what they have done or not done. The truth is that all the sanctions that we have seen, most of the sanctions that we have seen are actually led by the US government. The G7 are actually just aligning to some of the sanctions, and most of the sanctions we have seen, either by way of cutting the supply of gold to the United States economy, whether to making it an economy where they can accept some kind of reliefs and grants in terms of products and commodities. I don't see this making any much of a difference, because at the end of the day, the government makes decisions, but the economy of the countries that have made these decisions also bear the brunt of some of this trade, what I could call trade imbalance in the global and globalized economy like the one we have in the world today.
So how would the price cap then work beside OPEC's operations? Because, I mean, you still need to understand that OPEC is the one that decides, you know, how much oil will be sold to countries, the benchmark for crude. So if the G7 have their own plans and have announced, okay, a cap of $60 per barrel, how does that correspond with what OPEC's decision is?
Amara, what I want you to understand is that over the years, a lot of countries, a lot of organizations, a lot of analysts have tried to break the ranks of what happens in OPEC. The truth is that all sorts of names have been given to that organization as being a cartel or whatever it is. But remember that our own very late Barkindo led a team from the OPEC to start what you call the OPEC Plus. That OPEC Plus meant that about 23 other countries that produce humongously crude oil but are not part of OPEC can be brought onto a table, hands across the desk, and have conversations that allow stability in oil prices. Russia is one very big ally of OPEC. A meeting was held on Sunday, and the decision was to keep to the production cut at about 87, for instance, today is trading at $87 to the barrel. Now, what that means is this: you make your pronouncement, but the realities of the market will take its preeminence. So, for instance, if the G7 countries refuse to buy from Russia, you can't stop Russia from selling to other countries like China or India, for instance. And what that will do is that it will further drive the cost of crude oil per barrel to the roofs, and it may return again to $100 per barrel. And if that happens, remember the high cost of crude oil also has a way of impacting finished products. So, for instance, in the UK, we are seeing prices of petroleum products so very high. Inflation and all of that is hitting 40%, the highest in a long while and in many years. So, whilst this country leadership are making decisions, and rightly so in their ranks, to bring Russia to a point where they can begin to feel the economic impact, not be able to raise money or make money to be able to pay for their weaponry, I want you to know that if there's anything anybody does not know or should know, is the fact that Putin has all of this figured out before he went into the war in February. And so this will not disrupt what OPEC is doing, because if you do that, other countries like Nigeria will be also affected by the price, either loom or boom. And this is not the time anybody wants to trade under low crude oil prices. Remember what happened in the COVID year? A country like Saudi Arabia could pay countries to come take up their crude because they produce at less than $10 per barrel. And so what I see Russia doing is that they will dig in deep, and find out a way they can cost production, make production optimized to the point where even if they sell at the $60 cap, for instance, to any country willing to buy, they will still make profit. It's about cost optimization in the oil and gas industry, especially now that technology is driving everything in the oil and gas, because crude can't go away from us. Everything you have around you, Amarachi, for instance, the microphone, the table, the earpiece, everything around you is petrochemical, and they all come from crude oil. So Russia will continue to sell its crude. Nigeria will continue to sell its crude. We'll continue to find markets. When we lost markets to the US, we'll find other markets in Asia and in other places. And Nigeria is still selling. Russia will sell. That's the sad part.
Yeah, only yeah, thank you again for the explainer. Now, crude oil prices have already risen this morning. You already mentioned $87 per barrel, slightly higher, slightly less. But Nigeria also sells crude, so we're just wondering, you know, what the impact will be on us here. I mean, it's good for the economy, isn't it? And that is as a result, you know, of what the G7 countries have decided.
Let me tell you something. It's always good to drill down and be sure of the economic indices of some of these things, so that we're not high-talking and high-flying and using semantic words. The truth is this: with what has happened with the Russia-Ukraine war, every country in the world is facing the consequences. The fuel scarcity you see on the streets of Lagos today has a leg in the Russia invasion of Ukraine, because whilst government have done everything to, for instance, subsidize the petroleum product and keep it at a reasonable price range of 165 naira to 170 naira, when that subsidy ends, on, like the guest was saying this morning, when that subsidy ends, when the ship brings in the product to this country, other factors like logistics kicks in. Diesel, cost of diesel moving from 60 naira, 80 naira, 120 naira to 800 naira per liter. Someone has to bear that brunt. That's the implication of Russia invading Ukraine and causing the energy crisis we see in the world. So we will continue to sell crude, $87, $90, $100, as the case may be. What we need to do inwards, which we've seen the last 2 years of NNPC Limited trying to cut down costs by way of its cost optimization program, which they call the NUCOP, will allow for you to produce less, or cost of production to be less, so that whatever the price is, $50, $60, $100, you are making money to be able to shore up your foreign reserve and shore up your currency reserves. Because all of these crises you see about dollar is because we're not earning enough, and we're earning just from crude, as it were, heavily from crude. But we'll continue to sell, as it were.
Olu, thanks again. Once again, we can't thank you enough for giving us this explainer. I would have loved to talk some more about the fuel crisis that's happening, biting harder on the streets of Lagos, and I think in the Federal Capital Territory. Any solution in sight, Olu, especially for those who are probably watching on their phones right now on the news?
You can't have malaria, at the same time decide not to take quinine. So it's a quinine and malaria analogy. Citizens have a role to play. As I speak to you today, I'm not aware that the over 5,000 kilometer pipeline of the country is working. And that is because if you put even water, vandals have vandalized pipelines they thought crude was running on, not knowing it's a test run. So today, all the petroleum products that you see in this country arrives in Lagos. So imagine the logistic challenge of moving those things on truck, first of all, to serve the Lagos and the Southwest region, serve the Middle Belt, and serve the Upper North. This is the challenge. Lagos Seaport remains the hub and the harbor for receiving some of these vessels. If we do something about our Calabar port, do something about the Onne port, then we can begin to decentralize some of these things. So when you talk about road, for instance, as an impediment, that is neither here nor there, because the truth is, it takes you about 2 weeks for you to do turnaround if you move a truck of 33,000 liters from Lagos to up north. Before they return and do another turn back, that is the difference that you see on the market today. And the federal government, in whatever wisdom that is, has decided not to subsidize, not to open the market freely to free market mechanisms to allow for a full deregulation. Once that doesn't happen, these challenges will continue. But have you also noticed that fuel stations that are selling about $235, $240 to the liter do not have queues? What does that tell you? It tells you that that is a reflection or reflective of what the current price of petroleum products, PMS, should be in the market. So if people should be ready to either pay the price of buying fuel at the right price, or make sure that they become citizens' army to protect the pipelines, because these pipelines traverses and crisscrosses cities, communities all across this country, and the communities are always having a hand in the kind of things that happen when it comes to vandalism. So the petroleum products are not traveling through the pipeline. That I must tell you, they're all moving through the trucks, and if they move through the trucks, they're subject to the road vagaries or the vagaries of the roads.
Olu, thank you again for explaining all of this to us on the program. We know you're on a special assignment at the moment, so we do hope that you take care as you continue to give us updates on the situation right there.
And I hope I find fuel too, because I'm also looking for fuel. So.
We all are, Olu, we all are. Thanks again. In other stories now, the largest trial in Belgian history has kicked off with 10 men accused of involvement in Islamist suicide bombings in Brussels in 2016 that killed 32 people and injured over 300. The trial is set to last 7 months and is sure to revive painful memories for those who've lost loved ones, were injured or witnessed the twin bombings at the airport and a third bomb at the metro in March 2016. Around 1,000 people have registered to be represented in the hearings. 9 of the accused are charged with multiple murders and attempted murders in the terrorist context and also face potential life sentences. All 10 are accused of participating in activities of a terrorist group. One of the group will be tried in absentia but is presumed to have been killed in Syria. Brussels bombings were claimed by Islamic State and killed 15 men and 17 women who came from Belgium, the United States, the Netherlands, Sweden, Britain, China, France, Germany, India, Peru, Poland, and many of them based in the city, which is home to EU institutions and NATO. 3 suicide attackers also died in the blast.